But they've had, and then so see, Mordechai Vanunu, I believe it was in 1986, was when the Israeli whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu revealed to the London Sunday Times that Israel had 200 atom bombs. And something else that Grant F. Smith uncovered was that they had at least been researching how to make hydrogen bombs. We don't know whether they ever achieved H-bomb capability or not. We know they were at least looking into it. But Mordechai Vanunu famously then was caught in a honey trap in Rome and locked in solitary confinement for like 20 or 25 years or something like this, horribly persecuted by his government for telling the truth about their program. And in fact,
where was he jailed? Who was that again?
His name is Mordechai Vanunu, and he was an Israeli nuclear scientist who took pictures of it all and revealed the whole program to the London Sunday Times. I'm almost certain it was in 1986, and you should still be able to find these articles online to this day about it.
And he was jailed for 20, 25 years under solitary confinement.
I believe so, yes.
Wow.
If you got a fact checker in the room, have him double check me on that, but I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I'll have KK in the background. We'll check that, but yeah.
Yeah, great. And I actually communicated with him on Twitter one time, and he verified to me that, yeah, the number in the London Times is right. I stand by that, 200. So he said that to me personally over old Twitter years ago. So that's where I got that from. And so then they've had this nuclear weapons monopoly in the Middle East ever since then. And they have this strange strategic ambiguity where they say things like, well, we will never introduce nuclear weapons into the region. As though like what you're doing is going, ladies and gentlemen, my atom bombs, and like, right, but they have introduced them into the region by having them in the region, and everybody knows they have them, but they have this like kind of silly denial, which leads to just backbreaking gymnastics on the part of American officials trying to pretend that they don't know whether Israel has nukes or not, or that they can't comment, and it's a big secret, when, of course, Colin Powell and many other American officials at certain times have admitted that, yes, of course they have nuclear weapons. Everybody knows that Israel is a nuclear weapon state, and yet they remain outside of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which, Mario, means that all American aid to Israel is illegal because they are a nuclear weapon state that is not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So
no one talks about that.
There's no rule of law here,
By the way, your stats about Vanunu spending times 18 years in prison, 11 in solitary confinement. So accurate numbers. It's not accurate. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how Israel got their nuclear weapons. I think it started off with France supporting the initial development, and then expanded to. And I think France stopped in the 60s, and then they kind of took it on their own. And that's where the conspiracy of a lot of people like to say that Israel was behind Kennedy's assassination. And that's because of that theory that Kennedy was trying to inspect. Exactly. He was trying to inspect those facilities.
Look, I'm not a big JFK guy. And in fact, because when I was really getting interested in politics, I really was kind of a conspiracy guy. But I knew that there was a stack of books about JFK this high that I just wasn't willing to read them all. And I really don't care that much. And so I never picked this particular avenue of investigation. But I think the new documents that are coming out, if you read Jefferson Morley, he's a former Washington Post reporter and probably the most credible and interesting of the JFK investigators to me. I don't spend that much time reading, but it's looking more and more like the faction of CIA that may have been behind this were really being run by James Jesus Angleton, who was, if not an Israeli double agent, was at least the absolutely most pro-Israel force in all of the CIA. And so, you can add that to your pile of potential reasons for his murder, but it's not completely outside the realm of possibility, quite frankly, and particularly when you take into account what an absolute in-the-tank Zionist Lyndon Baines Johnson was. And in fact, even one of his mistresses was a Mossad agent. I'm sorry, I forget her name at the time, but you can check me on that. He had, one of his girlfriends at the time that he was president was Mossad. And so, and plus he'd just been, I believe he was raised very Zionist. He knew Zionist Jews, and he knew born again end times Christians growing up who all, were very much in support of the Zionist project like his whole life. So I'm not saying he was just bribed and corrupt, but he was that too.
And let's go into Iran. When did Iran start having nuclear ambitions?
They, under the Shah, in the 1970s, they began building a civilian nuclear program, and in fact, somewhere you can find, I think I have this in my file somewhere, is, a copied page out of a Time magazine or Newsweek where it was an advertisement by, I think it was General Electric, it could have been like Honeywell maybe, that was like, "Announcing our new nuclear reactor project in Iran," and it was like a big, it was like an advertisement for their thing, basically selling you stock, I guess, in the company that like, "These are the major moves we're making in the world, spreading atoms for peace." That was what Eisenhower called it, and so, as long as the Iranian regime was a loyal client, I don't think they really wanted the Shah getting nuclear weapons. They didn't mind him having, a rudimentary nuclear program, but I don't think they ever got very far with that. Um, and then after the revolution, 1979, I think would have been completely mothballed. Whatever they did have would have been essentially no progress whatsoever through the era of pardon me, of the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. And they may have, begun doing some research into, uranium enrichment in the 1990s. I think, geez, I'm sorry, I would have to go back and see when their Bushehr and Iraq reactors were constructed originally. I think they may both have gone back to the Shah's era and then were only, turned on and run. See, um, mm, I'm sorry, I forget. That might not be right. The Bushehr reactor may have been built in the W. Bush years. I know that their enrichment capability came from black market stuff that they bought from A.Q. Khan, who was the Pakistani nuclear,
Oh,
equipment supply.
yes.
So he had stolen all of these blueprints, like a ton of blueprints and technology and whatever, um, uh, information from,
Mm.
I think it was a joint French and Belgian firm called Urenco, and he stole all that stuff, and the CIA knew he stole it and let him get away because they wanted to see where he went, the damn
Oh,
fools, and
really?
so
So the Pakistani, the Mr. Khan, the CIA let him get away? They were
they let him
monitoring him
get
the whole
away.
time?
Yeah, they knew he had stolen all the stuff, and they let him do it. I forget my source for that, it's been 20 years since I read about that, but you can find that somewhere, I'm sure. Um, but then so this was the basis of the Pakistani nuclear weapons program was
Mhm.
based on the centrifuges that he, had designed and all that, and then he proliferated this stuff. He sold aluminum tubes, the legit kind for centrifuges, to North Korea, as well as to Iran, but now I'm blanking, and I plead, guilty here, I'm sorry that I don't remember exactly what all they got from him. I know they got centrifuges from him to build their
Mm.
original cascades at Natanz. I'm not sure if any of the Bushehr and Iraq reactors came from him, but I think they very well may have because, um, in the 1990s, Iran was trying to buy light water reactors, and they were gonna get a light water reactor, at least one from China, and Bill Clinton intervened and essentially prevented the Chinese, one way or the other, I forget, just, I guess, leaned on them and made them, break the deal and not deliver a light water reactor, and the thing is, if you wanted to really call Iran's bluff and say, "So you guys want a civilian nuclear program, huh? Well, giving them light water reactors makes a lot of sense because a light water reactor produces waste that is so polluted with all different isotopes and things that you can essentially not refine weapons grade plutonium out of the waste the way that you can a heavy water reactor. That's the point of a light water reactor is that it doesn't produce weapons fuel as waste. And so by sabotaging that deal, the Iranians ended up, I think, yeah, then in late Clinton and early Bush years would have been then when they ended up building the heavy water facility at Bushehr. And then later they dug this giant underground warehouse at Natanz in 2005. And I believe it was in the beginning of 2006 that they started introducing the uranium centrifuges at Natanz and began enriching uranium. All of
Mm.
which, was declared. They claim that Iran was breaking the law and in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and in violation of their safeguards agreement with the IAEA to do these things, but that's not true. The stipulation under the International Atomic Energy Agency Safeguards Agreement is that they have to announce 6 months before they introduce nuclear material into any machine in order to change it in any way. And so they were totally within um, that realm. So had they dug the facility in secret? Yes. But had they introduced nuclear material into any machines before being called out? No. And in fact, they claim that it was the Israelis who called them out, but I believe it was actually, and maybe he was tipped off by the Israelis, but it was the American nuclear analyst David Albright who first identified the site at Natanz, and there wasn't a single spinning centrifuge in there at the time. And years later, the same kind of scam happened when they built the Fordo facility, otherwise known as COM, and which is under the mountain there. It was one of the targets in the War of June, where they built the secondary centrifuge facility. And the war party in America and Europe just claimed that they had outed the Iranians for having this secret facility. But it was just a lie. And you just check the timeline. The Iranians announced to the IAEA, we have a facility we want to show you because in approximately 6 months, we're going to be introducing nuclear material there. So just like in the deal, we are declaring this facility to you. And then the next day, the Americans went, aha, we caught you. You have a facility and we are announcing it to the world. When, what are you talking about? They already said the same thing themselves the day before. And then they just lied and pretended, and the whole world went along. The Times and the Post and the Journal and all the TV went along with pretending that they had outed this secret facility, which the Iranians had admitted to themselves. And so, what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is that the Ayatollah, up until June anyway, ask me a bit again about post-June in a second. Up until June of 25, the Ayatollah's position had been that they were developing a nuclear capability under the guise of a civilian nuclear program, which it is. It provides electricity. They only need 3.6% enriched uranium-235 for that. They can go up to 20% for targets for their medical isotope reactors. And the point of this being, look, and I'm not asking anyone to be naive about this. The Iranians' cover story is that this is all about electricity, man. It's fine. I'm not asking you to believe that. I don't think that that's really right. I think it's maybe 60-40 about electricity, but what's the 40? The 40 is proving that they know how to enrich uranium. They have mastered the fuel cycle. They can turn uranium metal into uranium hexafluoride gas. They can enrich it up to higher and higher percentages of uranium-235, the sweet stuff, and they can convert it back into metal again, which means they have the potential to make nuclear warheads. In other words, don't mess with me, or I might begin to make nuclear bombs. So it is a latent nuclear deterrent. It's what they call
Mm.
a nuclear threshold state, equivalent to Germany, Japan, or Brazil. We know that they can make nuclear weapons, but they're not making them. Apparently, they don't feel the need to make them. And so let's not put them in a position where they decide that they feel like now they do need to make them. So this has been the standoff this whole time, see, is the Americans saying, if you make a nuke, we'll attack you. And the Iranians saying, hey, if you don't attack us, we won't make a nuke. But if you do attack us, we might. Right? Which was the perfect standoff and the perfect basis for a negotiation, which more or less was the agreement that Barack Obama reached in 2015. And don't misunderstand me as giving credit to the guys. The only thing he ever did right was try to take war off the table by increasing the amount of inspections and scaling back the Iranians' nuclear program. It's true the deal was not perfect. There were sunset provisions in it and things that still could have required further negotiation, but he was trying to prevent war by demonstrating to everyone that we know what they do not have, and we know what they are and are not doing. It's not, we're not wondering, we've rolled back their program enough and expanded inspections enough that we can guarantee the civilian nature of their program, and we can guarantee that if they try to break out and make a nuke, it will take them so long that we will be able to bomb them first. And we'll be able to essentially blow up any progress that they have made before they're able to complete the first one. So now, Mario, put yourself in the position of the Ayatollah. He can't really break out and make a nuke because we'll bomb him if he does. So he's sort of got this latent deterrent. Then the Israelis and the Americans call his bluff in June and bomb him. But then you gotta I'm an anti-war guy, and I've warned for a couple of decades now that if we do this, that is what is most likely to drive Iran to now want to get a nuke and
Mm.
to get a nuke. And I still think that that's true. And because why? They attacked them. They were not able to destroy every last thing in there by air. And Iran could just build a deeper tunnel under a taller mountain and continue where they left off from. It'd take them a while, but we don't have the ability to truly stop them from spinning centrifuges without a full-scale regime change and occupation of the country, which is not in the cards. It cannot happen. So essentially, the war in June they claimed was a great success, but it was only the first quarter. We don't know, one, whether they're going to continue to enrich uranium, whether they have the ability to restart soon. I do think that it's almost certain that they are going to continue enriching uranium, at least at their first opportunity, that they have not been stopped from that. And then whether America is going to accept that or whether we're going to go back to war. And we're essentially, again, the only actual end state where you can guarantee that they are definitely not going to make a nuke is if you can put a new sock puppet dictator in there and control him to that degree. And that's just
But
not.
do you think that's the plan? But do you think that's the plan for the next war? And I was interviewing, I can't remember his name yesterday, and he made the assumption that he expects the war before the midterm, so by December this year, and before Iran is able to rebuild a lot of their capabilities. So that was his timeline. There was an interview with Mr. Trita,
No
which I'm sure
treat
you know.
Parsi. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
Parsi, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, your thoughts on that, and then if what you're saying is right, if the only way to completely remove their ability to build a nuclear weapon is through a regime change, does that mean this is Israel and potentially America's strategy in the next war?
Yeah. Okay, so a couple of things there. First of all, I agree with Trita that they are more likely to make a nuke now than they ever were before. Their government announced at the United Nations, I believe yesterday, or might have been the day before yesterday, that uh, I'm sorry, I only just saw the headline. I didn't see if it was the foreign minister or what, but that they announced that they are still not making nuclear weapons, that they have no interest in making nuclear weapons, that the previous Ayatollah and the current Ayatollah's fatwa against weapons of mass destruction still stand, and that you had no reason to attack us because we weren't making a nuke anyway, and we're still not. So bluff called, and we're still not making a nuke because we told you we weren't. Now, I'm not saying that we can believe that. That's exactly what they would say if they have decided to break out toward a nuclear weapon. And now we have a break in the chain of custody and continuity of the inspections. So is it possible that now in the aftermath of the war, they've been able to divert enough uranium from their program that now they can invite the inspectors in, try to make it look like everything is still copacetic when in fact something has been diverted? There's a real risk there. And I'm not trying to hawk it up against them and accuse them of making nuclear weapons because it is a plausible denial. It's been true that they weren't making nuclear weapons up until now. And so it's maybe 51% or even higher percent likely that it's true that they're still not. But they're certainly much more likely now to pursue nuclear weapons. The real problem, though, is that regardless, let's say they don't, that the guy yesterday was, or a couple days ago was
Just
telling the
quickly,
truth.
Scott, why do you think they reached their uranium to such a high level post October 7th?
Oh, well, it wasn't post October 7th. It was post Israeli sabotage at Natanz. First, they killed the head of the Iranian nuclear program in December of 2020, and then they did a big sabotage at Natanz in April of 2021. And it was in the aftermath of that that they started enriching up to 60%. It was not correlated with the October 7th attack at all. And the only purpose of that was so that they could negotiate it away. That was exactly what it was, because 60% is useless to you. You need 20% for your medical isotope reactors. You need at least 85, but usually they say 90 or better percent U-235 to make a nuclear warhead out of it. So what is the point of 60%? It's just a bigger bluff. As they say, if you read about it in the journal, they'll say, well, it's easier to go from 60 to 90 than from 20 to 90. Well, yeah, that's right. So in other words, it's a card to play in
Better
negotiation.
deterrence. I assumed it was, especially after the proxies were all hit by Israel, then that deterrence became a lot more important when Hezbollah was decapitated, when the Houthis were decapitated, when Hamas is
But
almost
that came later.
non-existent.
I mean, that all,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. But I made
yeah.
the assumption that then the deterrence became a lot more important. But you said it that enrichment, the increase in enrichment started in 2020 after the sabotage.
Yeah, and it was, Trump tore up the treaty in
JCPOA.
2018. Yeah, and then the Israelis went right back to their assassination campaign and all of that, and then they killed the head of the nuclear program, Fakhrizadeh, in December of 20. So and then remember at the dawn of the war, we were in negotiations. Donald Trump and his team were sending out signals that the negotiations are getting there. And the big pill to swallow for the Western side is that we will accept some enrichment because the Ayatollah will die before he gives up enrichment. That's a fact. They are not, that's like to them, obviously, the like most important symbol of their independence and sovereignty is that they insist on their right to enrich. And people go, as I said before, the civilian nuclear program in a way can be seen as a fig leaf for the nuclear deterrent. But then again, now that their bluff is called, it's not in evidence that they're pursuing nuclear weapons. And by the way, it does make economic sense for Iran that does have a domestic supply of uranium, as well as obviously huge domestic supplies of oil, to burn the uranium and sell the oil. There's not nearly as much of a demand on the world market for uranium as there is for petroleum. So it only makes sense to run their domestic electricity program off of uranium if they got some, and so they can sell the oil and spend that on everything else. So just in terms of comparative advantage, it makes sense for them to do that. And if we normalized relations with Iran and put all of this competition, and especially strategic competition in the region aside, then it wouldn't matter anyway, right? We don't care that Pakistan has nuclear weapons. We're friends with Pakistan. And so it's the same kind of thing. You win more flies with honey and that kind of deal. It's sort of like they say, well, we had to nuke Hiroshima and Nagasaki because how else could we get them to unconditionally surrender? Yeah, well, maybe you could have dropped the unconditional surrender thing, so you didn't have to go that far. It's the same thing here. We just kind of bake in the premise that since Iran is our satanic, eternal, evil enemy that must be kept at bay with fire at all times, we're supposed to assume that at the start of any discussion here. When the reality is Donald Trump could just get on a plane and fly to Tehran and make friends with the Ayatollah, tell Netanyahu to go to hell, and we could just have the first day of the rest of our lives starts tomorrow. There's no reason it has to be like this at all.
Could we see that happen? Not flying into Tehran, but could we see normalization of relations between the US and Iran? Not now, obviously, it seems impossible now, but over the next 5 years, because we see Saudi and Iran get closer together. Obviously, China negotiated the normalization there, but now after the Qatar strike, I think the Arab countries are all coming, or the Middle Eastern countries are coming together more than before. And then you've got this sentiment. There's a whole new generation, and a treaty also talked about it yesterday. Is that there's a whole new generation that is shifting their stance on Israel. So then normalization of relations with Iran just does not seem that taboo anymore. Could we see that happen maybe by the next administration? Is it more of a possibility today than it was, 10, 20, 30 years ago?
I mean, the only rub here is the damn Likud. We could have solved this problem, this whole time. It was Dick Cheney in the 1990s wanted to normalize relations with Iran before he was Bush's vice president. It was Zbigniew Brzezinski who was on the job during the Iranian Revolution and had all that egg on his face for the hostage crisis, the revolution, the failed rescue mission, everything made Zbigniew Brzezinski look absolutely like trash. But by 1993, he said we should normalize relations with Iran. Just like Cheney said, we should build an oil pipeline across Iran, get that Caspian oil, and then find a way to include Iran in the business as a way to normalize with them. The revolution was a long time ago. They always bring up the Beirut bombing of our Marines in 1983, when it wasn't even Iran that did that. It was an Iranian-backed group that did that. And